It was a miserable winter day in mid-Ohio. A strong wind was blowing snow and sleet from the northwest, and I was coming down with the flu. I'm a carpenter, and we were working to frame up a house out on a windswept rise. I had been working a lot of overtime lately trying to get some money ahead to take our kids to Panama City, Florida over spring break. Money was always tight with us since we bought the big, new house a couple of years ago that my wife had to have, and I was looking forward to ogling the college co-eds on the beach as part of family R&R down there. Today, though, I was really suffering with a headache, a fever, and the weather, so I told the foreman I was going home. He took one look at me and told me to get the hell out of there before I got pneumonia. I was only too glad to comply, and within a few minutes I was in my old truck and heading home. I thought about calling my wife on my cell phone, but it seemed like such an effort in the condition I was in. Before I get too far into my tale, I should tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Ron Harding, 36 years old, 6 foot, and weighing in about 220 pounds. Alright, I was a little heavy, but I like my beer and relaxing when I wasn't working. I'm starting to lose my hair too, but I wasn't in the running for anything new in my love life, so what the hell? The love of my life was Nell, short for Nellie, my wife of 16 years. We were in the same graduating class and married pretty much right out of high school and started our married life living with my folks. They had a big, old house with plenty of room, so it wasn't too bad. Nell and my mom got on well together, which made the living situation workable. My dad got me a job working with him as a carpenter, and that's where I picked up the trade. Nell now works part-time in a doctor's office 3 days a week keeping track of medical records and insurance claims. She brings in a little extra money for the family. Nell is a nice-looking girl, not glamorous, but nice-looking. She stands 5 feet 4 inches and weighs around 140 pounds. She carries a little extra weight like I do, but it looks good on her. After having 2 kids, she doesn't look bad at all. I know she can still get me aroused. We had our 2 kids early in our marriage. Brad is 15 and Angie is 13. They're good kids and average students, and we get along pretty good as a family. I tend to be the disciplinarian while Nell is the nurturer. That's the way it should be, I guess. Anyway, I was on my way home early, and it was about 1:30 p.m. on a miserable day. I felt like shit, and all I wanted to do was get home, have a long hot shower, then take a hefty slug of NyQuil and a couple of aspirin and go to bed. This was Nell's day off, so I could expect a little tender care from her even though I didn't want to give her whatever I had. Arriving home, I pulled into the garage and noted our car was gone, but assumed Nell had gone shopping or something. After closing the garage door, I stumbled in the house and headed upstairs to our bedroom and the master shower. I was really looking forward to having that hot water pour over my miserable body. Entering the bedroom, I noticed that the bed was unmade and thought it was odd because Nell always kept a very neat house and she always had a fit if things were out of place or not neat. I started to strip off my clothes and throw them on the floor when I noticed wet spots on the bottom sheet of the bed, left exposed by the thrown-back top sheet and comforter. I reached down with my finger and tentatively touched it. It was wet and felt slimy. I brought my finger to my nose and was shocked at the smell of a female and also semen. Shit, I thought, she's cheating on me. This sure wasn't my as we hadn't had sex for a couple of days. Hell, I thought some more, we hadn't had sex in over a week. I'd been too tired after getting home from working overtime and just ate and crashed into bed. I was in a quandary, but with the fever and headache my brain couldn't function, so I decided to get my shower and medications and sleep till I could handle this new situation. Damn, I was upset and getting madder by the minute as I stepped into the shower and let the hot water warm my cold body. That was the only thing that felt good because the rest of me was in a turmoil. After drying myself off and getting into my PJs, I took a couple of aspirin and a slug of NyQuil, then began to move my personal stuff out of our bedroom down the hall to our guest room. As I was finishing that up, I heard the door to the garage go up, and I knew she was getting home, and the shit was about to hit the fan. There were voices in the kitchen now, and I realized she had someone with her, then steps hurrying upstairs. "Oh, you're home," she said as she appeared pale and shaken as she looked at me as I was carrying some clothes down the hall. I had to go to school in a rush as the school called that Brad was sick. "Are you feeling all right?" "No, I'm sick too, and I'm going to bed," I told her as I continued down the hallway. "What's going on? Aren't you sleeping in our bed?" "No, I don't want to give the flu to you, and I know you don't want to give it to your lover." The shock on her face was immediate. "What do you mean?" "Just go in and look at the bed, Nell, and tell me that isn't what I think it is on the sheet." "Oh no. Oh God. I didn't want you to find it, but I had to rush to school." "What are you going to do?" she asked as she sagged against the wall, her face full of tears and anguish. I'm not going to do anything until I can get through this thing I've caught, but you'd better be ready for an explanation and a reason when I feel up to handling it. I told her as I continued into the guest room. Where are you going? I'm going into my room. I'll never sleep in that bed again. You can save it for your lover, and you'd better be prepared to give me his name too. Oh, please honey, don't. I broke in on her. Don't call me honey. As far as I'm concerned, you've broken our wedding vows and we don't have a marriage anymore. I'll be sleeping in here until I can figure out what to do. Oh God, was all I heard as I shut the door and climbed into the guest bed. The next thing I knew was when I woke and found myself in darkness. My hand went over to the side of the bed where Nell usually slept and found it vacant. Then I slowly realized where I was and began to remember where I was and why. Cursing softly to myself, I sat up. I realized I was hungry and found my robe and then quietly slipped downstairs to the kitchen. Turning on the light, I noticed by the clock that it was a little after 2 a.m. I found some leftovers in the fridge and after heating them in the microwave, sat down to eat. Suddenly, I realized I was feeling better, allowing me to think about my marriage. A noise at the door caused me to look up and end my thoughts, and Nell was standing there in her night robe looking at me. I heard you come down. Are you feeling well enough to talk now? She asked. Her eyes were red as though she'd been crying. Yes, we can talk. Are you ready to tell me about it? I'll try. I think I know who it is, but why don't you confirm it? I don't think I can tell you that. Then there isn't anything to talk about, is there? I'll move out right away. Please, Ron. It's John. I suppose you mean Dr. John Clements? Yes. How long has it been going on? About 6 weeks. Do you love him? I don't know. You don't know, and you were screwing him in our bed. The bed we conceived our children, and I thought where we made love. But then, maybe they aren't my children. I had to give her some hurt. Oh God, no, Ron. Don't think that. Is it over? I don't know. You don't know? I roared. Please, Ron, keep your voice down. You'll wake the children. No, I don't know. Then you want a divorce. No, I still love you, and he's married with 3 kids the age of ours. He's in the same situation I'm in. He can't leave his family, but needs my love like you do. Do you think I'm going to remain a cuck while you're off servicing another man? Ron, I think you should know that I talked with a lawyer yesterday afternoon after you went to bed, and he told me that a divorce would end up being terribly expensive for you in this state. Not only would you have to pay for the divorce itself, you would have to pay me alimony and also child support. You would also lose custody of the children. I think it would be better if you let me continue my meetings with John until we eventually end our association. She sat there primly and calm now that she had stated her position. I stared at her in disbelief and with a mounting rage. Through gritted teeth, I asked her, do you really think that I will sit back and let you continue drilling your lover and cucking me while I work myself to death trying to support you in this lifestyle? Is this going to be your response and position on this? I'm sure when you sit down and think about it, you will see that you may not have many other options, and yes, I believe that is my position. My rage was almost a physical thing as I responded, okay then. Tomorrow I will contact a lawyer and see what I can get in the way of a second opinion regarding my options. Give it some more thought and I will give you my response tomorrow night. Is that satisfactory? I want you to know that I still love you and hope you will let me have this fling, because that's all it is, a fling. When it's over, I will be back in a few weeks ready to be your wife again. Let me make this clear. I told her, I will never accept this in any way, shape, or form. Finally, how do you expect me to take you back after you're done screwing him and still be able to trust you that you'll never do it again? You have broken the marriage contract we made before God on a whim, and you expect me to believe you'll never do it again? I don't think so. I was hoping we could handle this in an adult, rational way, but I see you want to be stubborn about it. Well, you go see your lawyer tomorrow and see what he says, and hopefully you'll come to your senses. I'm going to bed now. Just remember this, Nell. We've been married 16 years and you should know me pretty well. Do you really think I will accept your position? Good night. She left without responding, leaving me there where I sat thinking about my situation. By 4 a.m., I had pretty well figured out what I would do. It would just take talking with the lawyer and my parents that day to bring it about. I went back to bed filled with a grim determination. The next morning, I awoke about 9 a.m. and proceeded to put my ideas into effect. The kids had gone to school and Nell to work by that time. The first order of business was to make an appointment with a divorce lawyer, which I set up for that afternoon. After eating breakfast, I went over to see my parents and had a long talk with them. They were appalled at what Nell was doing but agreed that what I was proposing was the only way to respond to her and agreed to support me. Next, I went to Nell's parents and made them aware of what was going on in our marriage. They were shocked and couldn't understand their daughter's actions and how it affected our family. After I left them, I called our insurance agent and our family lawyer and made changes in my policy and my will. I then called my boss and talked with him for a while before going down to the bank. It was a very busy day, and it was late afternoon when I finished with a final phone call. I was now ready to meet with Nell and give her my response. While I waited for the kids to get home from school, I began to move stuff to my old truck. When Brad and Angie got home from school, I took them into the den and we sat down for AA talk. I figured they were old enough and told them what their mother was doing. They were both shocked and mortified at her actions. I explained to them what was going to happen, and I knew it hurt them deeply, but they understood. I assured them that whatever happened, they would be looked after, and then I drove them over to my parents before Nell got home. Nell arrived home at her usual time, and when she came in the door to the kitchen, I was sitting at the table waiting for her. "Didn't you go to work today?" she asked. "No, I had some things to do." She just shrugged her shoulders and removed her coat. After hanging it up, she came to stand in front of me. "Where are the kids?" "They're over at my folks." "Have you given any thought about what we discussed last night?" she asked. "Yes, I've given it quite a bit of thought, and I met with a divorce lawyer today who confirmed what you've told me about my responsibilities in the event of a divorce. So, then it's settled. You will let me have my little fling, and we can go on with our lives." "No. You remember I told you I would not agree to sitting around here or support you while I'm being cucked. So, I've come up with other plans." "What are they?" she asked with a perplexed look on her face. "I'm not going to divorce you." She immediately smiled. "Then how are you going to avoid being cucked?" "Well, I might be being cucked, but I don't think it will be with John. I called his wife today and told her what was going on. I don't think you're going to have a job tomorrow." "Oh shit. You didn't?" she gasped out. "I've also quit my job and am now unemployed." Her eyes almost bugged out of her head. "Are you crazy? What are we going to live on?" "I think you should be asking yourself that question. What are you going to live on?" "What do you mean?" "I'm leaving you. I'm not divorcing you. If you want a divorce, you can get one and pay for it yourself. You can use abandonment as the cost." "What about the kids?" "My parents have agreed to look after them if you're unable to support them. You may have to sign over custody to them so they can get them covered by health insurance. I've already talked to them, and they, your parents and mine, know about your little fling and what you selfishly proposed. I don't think you are too popular right now with any of them." "How could you do that?" "I'll get a lawyer and get the courts after you if you abandon me. And the kids." She added the last as an afterthought. "You can do whatever you want. I'm going to be a long way from here, and you might have hired someone to try to locate me. I don't think you're going to have the money to do that, and even if you found me, there is no way a court can force me to work if I don't want to. So, you are now responsible for making the mortgage payments, the car payments, and the payments on the new furniture you had to have. I've taken half the money I was saving to go to Florida, and I'm leaving you with my last paid check, which will be automatically deposited to our checking account. I've also changed my will and insurance policies to make the kids beneficiaries of any proceeds from them. You will get nothing from either of them. When you go to sell this house, you will find that paying off the mortgage and closing costs will eat up most of the equity we have in it. You are a hole. You are a 304 and a very selfish individual. You didn't know when you had it so good. You just wanted more." Standing up, I headed for the door. "Have a good life, Nell." Walking out to my truck, which I had loaded up with my personal things and my tools, I backed out of the garage and drove away. That day, I drove all night to put as much distance between me and her as I could. I drove all night long until I was so tired, I couldn't drive anymore. My direction was south to the Gulf Coast where construction work abounded, and I could lose myself in the anonymous life of an itinerant carpenter. I found others there in the same boat as I, constantly moving to avoid discovery by lost wives, lives, and families. My parents kept me informed about what had transpired after I left. Of course, Nell lost her job at the doctor's office and his wife took him to the cleaners in a well-advertised divorce. He and Nell were never an item after that. Nell found work as a cashier at a supermarket but lost the house, the car, and all the furniture. She ended up in a cheap apartment with no chance of finding another husband to support her since she couldn't afford to divorce me. The kids ended up living with my folks and they raised them. I sent money home to care for them and enough to start a savings fund for their college education. I also sent them cards and money at Christmas and for their birthdays and kept in touch with by phone. 7 years after leaving, I traveled back home and was briefly reunited with my kids. Nell had never recovered their love and affection after I left, and they'd bonded with my folks. They turned out to be responsible people who had learned a lot about trust and loyalty in their upbringing. While I was back home, I went down to the store where Nell was still working as a cashier and took some items through her line. When she looked up and saw me, her shocked face turned ashen, and when I asked her, "Are you having a good life, Nell?" she fainted. I left without looking back. I never saw her again. Now for the second story. It was a cold Tuesday evening in mid-November, and Bruce Finley was still at his office. He was working on a contract that had to be done by Friday. Finley seldom procrastinated, and he was confident he could have it finished as early as the next morning. He neatly stacked the files he'd used and slipped them into the modern-looking mahogany cabinet behind his desk chair. He then locked it. Finley was in his late 30s, fairly tall, almost 6'2", and slim. He had a pale, somewhat angular face. He pulled on his suit coat, then his cashmere topcoat. His wardrobe was a bit more expensive than his income could justify. He ran a comb through his straight, thinning blonde hair and headed out the door. As he took the elevator to his parking level, he thought about his kids, both middle schoolers, and his wife. For weeks, Adam and Julia had given him happier thoughts than his wife, Bridget. God, she'd been such witch lately, he muttered to himself. He thought about the sexy blonde waiting for him at the Hilton, and his mood brightened. He smiled in anticipation. He remembered how hot she'd been the week before. She was tall, with good legs and great body. She was a few years older than him, but God, she was hot. He'd never had anything like hers. She really got into it. Jesus, did she have a hot body? She could almost squeeze him off without him moving. But then, what fun would that be? He chuckled softly to himself as he headed down the dimly lit, 80-foot parking ramp to level 4, looking forward to the coming 2 hours in Suite 606. He strolled leisurely towards his car, through the shadows of the ramp. His eyes turned downwards and his mind was far away. It's just as well Bruce Finley wasn't paying attention. Awareness would not have helped him. It would have only added a few seconds of needless panic before his happy, everyday life would be rocked to its core. Unguy. He grunted as something smashed him viciously between his right cheekbone and nose. Jolting his head violently to his left, he felt the sickening snap in his nose. He reeled further to his left, away from a large concrete support pillar. Clinging to a glimmer of awareness, he felt himself being spun around and his back slammed violently into that same pillar. The next blow hammered into his solar plexus. The impact stunned him and his mouth fell open as if in a gasp. If he only could gasp. He couldn't breathe. Doubly shocked now, from the blow to his head and his suddenly paralyzed breathing apparatus, he had no chance to ward off the fierce kick launched upward into his crotch. The blinding explosion of pain hurled him into the darkness. He never felt the follow-up punch, the one that battered his other cheekbone and split the outer part of his eyebrow to the tune of, say, for stitches? Somehow this mayhem overwhelmed him, without giving him a clue to his attacker's identity. He'd seen only a hazy image of his tormentor. He could vaguely make out the shape of a man a bit shorter, but broader, than he was. His first hint of consciousness was the pain. He heard everywhere, and he moaned softly. He couldn't hear anything. Gradually, he became aware of noises. He heard faint traffic sounds in the distance. He was stuck there in limbo for another 20 seconds or so, feeling the dank cold of the concrete floor, when he felt himself being prodded by the toe of a boot. He groaned again and felt more prodding, several sharp pokes in a row. He moaned in protest. "Buddy." Finley began to stir a bit, and he could vaguely hear the voice of his assailant. "Hey buddy, you don't look so good." He looked like shit and would soon look worse. He felt it too. His aching testicles swelled as he shivered helplessly on the floor. "You feeling better?" That damn voice again, who was it? He wasn't feeling better, aside from the whole consciousness thing. He felt the skin on his face tighten. It would swell like a balloon in 10 minutes. By the next morning, it would be an ugly purple mass, and the colors would soon morph into one more or less disgusting shade after another. "Ah, your nose looks a little crooked. That's not good. You might want someone to take a look at it." Bruce Finley's senses and brain were beginning to connect with reality, the reality that had turned so terribly wrong over the preceding 3 minutes. He opened his eyes when he felt a warm trickle on his hand. He thought it was red. Just how red, he couldn't tell in the dim light. The drips were falling slowly, but from the amount of blood on his hand and on the dirty floor, it must have bled a lot when he went down. He weakly wiped the black cashmere sleeve of his coat across his nose and bleeding eyebrow. "Bruce." That voice was followed by a few seconds interval. Then, "Bruce, wake up, sleepyhead. We need to talk." Funny, the voice didn't sound hostile. Now it sounded light and airy, like someone encouraging him. Encouraging him to do what? What? What I want? It would take 3 more minutes before he could speak coherently. His stomach suddenly revolted and he began to vomit. While he retched, repeatedly, almost nothing came out. That's right, he'd skipped lunch. Finley was laying on his side but could raise his head. He flinched, bringing his forearms up in front of his face when he saw his attacker step towards him. The man roughly slapped his arms away and, with his 2 gloved hands grabbing Finley's coat, yanked him to a sitting position against the pillar. Hey, a-hole, do you know who I am? What's my name, Finley? His voice was no longer light and airy. It was harsh, loud, and contemptuous. Finley's very name sounded disgusting and foul. Hearing his own name again finally startled him. He was not just some nameless victim. Knowing that he, personally, was the target of this brutality spun his mind into another whirl of confusion. Why? His focus returned when he felt the sharp slap, delivered by his tormentor's right hand. He raised his sleeve again to wipe at the blood dripping down his cheek. Bruce. Bruce. Wake up, you stupid weasel. Can you hear me? The voice was again harsh and insistent. The man stared at his victim with coldly focused attention. He knew Finley was an okay lawyer for an indecent law firm in the city. He made good, but not great, money and had a family. He wasn't a really bad guy. He did have an outsized sense of entitlement. As with most attorneys, it came to him as if a part of his diploma upon graduation from law school. And, of course, he cheated on his wife. Bruce. Do you know who I am? The words came out slowly, as if directed at a small child. The tone grated in Finley's head. Finley approached full, if painful, awareness. With effort, he directed his attention to the man's face. He was a normal-looking guy, a bit better looking than average, square-jawed, with wavy, dark brown hair and eyebrows. His eyes looked dark, but then they were in badly lit parking garage. He was 6 feet or so, and, even covered by the wool jacket he wore, he looked very athletic and powerful. Finley had never seen him before in his life. No, I don't think. Who are you? His words were still slow and slurred. Are you sure, Bruce? Are you sure you've never seen me before? Not even in a picture? The stranger's look was angry and impatient. I don't think so. No, I haven't seen you before. He spoke more clearly this time. He looked at him, desperately trying to find some association, some reason to remember him. The man shook his head in exasperation, perhaps disbelief. That's too bad, Bruce. If someone's going to do something like this to you. He gave a vague wave of his hand towards Finley, indicating his general condition. If you're going to get the shit kicked out of you, you should at least know why, don't you think? Finley looked dumbly at the man, not knowing what to say. He watched him pace back and forth for a minute or so. His olive skin, a bit tanned, was far from pale, but his grim expression darkened him even more. Bruce. He suddenly roared Finley's name at his cowering victim. The ramp was then silent. No echo in here tonight? Is there, Bruce? He paced some more, restless as a hungry predator. There are actions, things that you do that cause echoes, Bruce. He virtually spit out Finley's name. For good or ill, they will bounce back at you. Tonight is your echo, Bruce. I am your echo, and I am enjoying it. Think, Bruce. Think for a moment about why someone would want to do this to you. Can you think of any reason? Have you done something bad at work? Something that really pissed someone off? Is that it? No, nothing at work. No, nothing there. Every word came with difficulty, the chaos in his brain again slowing his speech. Really, Bruce? His voice was low and rough. There isn't some guy out there who thinks you screwed up his case? Are you sure? No. Finley mumbled and shook his head. Well, his interrogator paced in frustration for a good 20 seconds. How about your wife? Do you think Bridget could be mad enough at you to hire me? Would she pay me to deliver this little message? Bridget, how do you know? His question died in midair. He was momentarily silent under the blank stare of this stranger. He resumed haltingly. She gets mad sometimes, he offered cautiously, but she'd never do this. Besides, I haven't. His voice trailed off into nothing. The man chuckled softly, as if in sympathy with his victim. No, I don't think Bridget would hire anyone to do anything like this. I agree with you. She is a real witch, though, isn't she? You almost have my sympathies. Dealing with her must be a real chore, a real pain in the bum. You look confused, Bruce. You know, I really know a lot about you and your family. Lovely kids, by the way, you should be proud of them. But I suppose you already know that, don't you? The man took a deep breath, paced a few steps, then returned to stand directly in front of him. He looked down at Bruce in annoyance. Well, Bruce, it's not your job and it's not your wife. What have you done that could piss someone off this much? There must be something. What is it, Bruce, that could make someone this furious with you? The tumblers in Bruce Finley's muddled brain finally fell into place. Oh, shit, he whispered, Carrie. It's Carrie. His heart began to race as he stared at the man who held him at his mercy. You're Jack Hogan. Hogan stared intently at Finley, shaking his head in wonder. I hate to say it, Bruce, but you don't seem too smart. Did you really think it was smart to screw another guy's wife, morality, and such aside, without knowing who her husband was and what he might do, what he might be capable of, when he found out? Did you really? He smiled with malice as he spoke. No, you didn't think at all. Did you, Bruce? By the way, how long has your little sexathon with my wife been going on? I'm just curious. I'm sure I could manage good guess, but humor me. Hogan's last few words were menacingly calm. Only a couple of months, in early September. Yeah, no earlier than that. Finley spoke softly, as if that would somehow lessen his offense. Hogan mused. I guess we did nail it down to the beginning. I just wanted to make sure about that. So, you met my wife for sex over a dozen times. Over a dozen times, Bruce. The few thumps I gave you somehow don't seem quite enough, given the enjoyment you had with my wife. Do they? Hogan was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. No, it really isn't enough. I think this will have some further implications for you, Bruce. I really do. Finley felt his innards sink. You do know that Hogan Industries does half its legal work through your firm, don't you? I know we're one of Hamilton Ross' 3 biggest clients. I'm sure you know that too. Hogan seemed lost in thought for a few moments. You're going to leave your firm, Bruce. I'm sure you can understand why. Can't you, Bruce? Finley's stomach churned again, and he sagged lower against the unyielding pillar. If you haven't left gracefully by the end of January, I'll find a way that's not so graceful. The threat was out there, and Finley had no doubt what would happen. No doubt that he could easily follow through with it. It might be a good idea to find a firm out of the city. It shouldn't be too bad. I hear you're a decent lawyer. You'll get a good reference. Hogan watched Finley as he absorbed Hogan's words. It'll cost you a few years to get back to where you are now, that is. But then, that's the price of ending another man's marriage. Isn't it, Bruce? Finley looked up at Hogan but didn't speak. The reason I don't want you nearby, Bruce, is for your own protection. You see, I'm feeling very vindictive right now. I really don't like feeling that way. It's just not healthy for either of us. But if you move, Bruce, then temptation will be out of sight. I won't be tempted to do anything drastic to ease the hurt that the next year or 2 will surely bring. I don't like being that kind of guy, Bruce. I'm sure you will appreciate that, won't you? Abruptly, Jack Hogan took in a deep cleansing breath, as if preparing for meditation. Bruce, I'm sorry we had to meet like this, but it had to be done, from my point of view, of course. Let me explain what's going to happen. Finley sat quietly, aching and feeling hopeless about his future, hardly able to listen as Hogan spoke. He glanced upward as Hogan continued. You are going home, and, regardless of how you explain this evening and your unfortunate appearance, we have never met. You will go on with your life, carrying this little memory with you, of course. Nothing more will happen to you, not for me at least, for your little dalliance with my wife. Hogan paced back and forth for a few moments, looking at his victim. But Bruce, don't think too much about this evening. Don't be tempted to call the police. That would be a serious error. He was speaking softly by then, like a patient teacher to a student. And you've seen how I deal with serious errors. There will be no physical evidence. In 30 minutes, everything I'm wearing will be ashes. I'll have no marks on me. Even my knuckles won't be bruised. Padded gloves, you see. I will have an alibi and a set of excellent pictures of your last few episodes with my loving wife. Hogan seemed calmer. He spoke softly and self-assuredly, as he did each day at his office. Finley sat numbly, thinking about the veiled threat of those pictures. Hogan had thought about sending the evidence to Finley's wife but decided not to. She would have enough difficult questions for him when he got home. Hogan thought about Finley's kids. They would handle a divorce better when they were out of high school. He was thankful his own kids were off at college. He could deal with that later. Hogan went on. We've established that your wife is a witch. He smiled at Finley as he said it. I can't imagine what she'd do if confronted with the explicit, high-def, in the act proof of your infidelity. It would be frightening. Hogan's grin chilled him. If I have my facts straight, and I do, she also has more money than you have. You have plenty of reasons to stay quiet. Finley looked at him numbly. Any thoughts of revenge were long gone. They'd never even started. One final thing and our evening will be complete. Hogan glanced at his watch. You need to get a move on to get to the Hilton. You don't want to be late for my wife, do you? What? Why would I see? Finley looked shocked and bewildered. You are going to meet my soon-to-be former wife, as scheduled. She will see what I've done to you, that you won't speak a word of that to her. Will you, Bruce? You won't be staying long, however. You will deliver a message. A very important message for her at least. First, you will tell her you are never going to see her again. You are going to call her a 304, she hates that word, and a witch. Then you will tell her that you are sorry you ever met her. I would guess that, by now, it's the truth. Isn't it, Bruce? Finley didn't respond. Before you leave her, Hogan continued, you will give her these. He handed Finley a large envelope that held 3 8x10 photos of Finley and Hogan's wife having sex, and a smaller envelope filled to a 1/2-inch thickness. He then handed him a passport, motioning for Finley to put both items in the larger envelope. There is some cash and a credit card in the envelope, as well as the passport. There's also a ticket to Mexico City. Hogan smiled to himself, remembering how much his wife disliked Mexico. It takes off at 11 tonight. Tell her she no longer has a husband. Tell her she no longer has a family. She also has no money, other than what's in that envelope. Hogan paused for a moment, as if unsure about what he should say next. Finally, he spoke. Tell her that, if she is not on that plane, Lopez will pay her a visit. Make sure she hears that. She will understand. This time I mean it. And, Hogan paused for a few moments, tell her not to come back. Ever. Hogan took a couple of deep breaths, shedding the tension of the previous 20 minutes. Finley, do exactly what I said. Remember, I'll be watching, he said, staring at the still-sitting attorney. If I ever have reason to see you again. Hogan paused briefly. Well, you don't really want to know. He spoke those final words sadly, as if he truly feared the prospect of a second meeting. With that, Hogan turned and strode briskly up the ramp to the elevator. He pushed the button. It opened immediately. He gave a quick glance at Finley as the door began to close. Finley watched him leave, as he sat leaning against the pillar. A minute later, he struggled to his feet and staggered towards his car. He would perform his tasks quickly and exactly as directed. He was cold and tired and anxious to go home. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.